weeks ago, but nonetheless, there have been numerous developments both globally and regionally here in Latin America and the Caribbean. Last week, we released our latest figures for September of this year. And unfortunately, traffic has not recovered to the level we've hoped. The resurgence of COVID-19, especially in Europe, is again dampening our demand. In September, global revenue passenger kilometers contracted by 72.8% year on year. In our region of Latin America and Caribbean, traffic for RPKs fell by 76.2% as compared to 2019. And when we look solely at Latin American airlines, the drop is a massive 92.2%, which is a very small improvement to the 93.4% drop registered in August of this year. We are, however, seeing stronger recoveries in some of the domestic markets in the region. For example, Brazil was down by 55.3% in terms of RPK in September year on year. Also in Mexico, several airlines have largely restored their capacity, reaching between 80 and nearly 100% of last year's levels, especially on the domestic market. That's very good news. As you can see from the chart, there is a direct correlation between entry restrictions and bookings. Those countries with the least amount of restrictions observed stronger bookings. With this in mind, I would like to summarize today's update under the heading IATA's calls for lifting restrictions and getting back to normal business as much as we can. With that, I would like to highlight some of the border restrictions as well as the ongoing operational restrictions we're facing in the region and what we need to do collaboratively with our airport partners, governments, in order to fully restart air travel in Latin America and once again bring public confidence so they can begin to travel, particularly as we begin to enter the high season, the summer season for our Latin American and Caribbean countries. Let me start off with Argentina. While some foreigners are now allowed to enter, mainly citizens of neighboring countries, we are asking the governments to reconsider the limitations urgently in terms of reopening or removing the restrictions for travelers from other nationalities outside the neighboring countries. Moreover, the current 45-minute separations between flights arriving into Buenos Aires Ezeiza Airport need to be reduced, and we're looking around 30 minutes as a first step. As this traffic picks up, we need to jointly find a way to manage the terminal capacity without forcing airlines into schedules which further complicate operations. And for those who have been to Buenos Aires or know of their operations there, it is highly congested during the early morning hours between 5 and 8 in the morning. So a 45-minute restriction between, or a 45-minute gap between aircraft or flights will certainly not help in restarting the market in Argentina, and thus the call to reduce the 45-minute separation. Also, the additional 30% tax on airline tickets needs to be removed. This is certainly going to restifle the recovery of sales in Argentina. Already a very difficult economic situation for Argentina, imposing taxations of this magnitude will deter the recovery of air travel and further risks airlines from restarting into that market. Across the Rio de Plata in Uruguay, the country is still maintaining its strict quarantine rules. It's the only country in the America that has not been designated high risk by the European Union. And this is actually very good news and complements the hard work that the Uruguayan country has done, the government, to safeguard its citizens from the COVID virus. However, we are asking the government to consider alternative needs in order for traffic to continue to grow. These quarantines will not help air travel, will not help Uruguayan passengers or citizens, nor will it help on the economic recovery. And we're hoping that Uruguay will follow the example of Paraguay, which has eased its restrictions on quarantine rules. Looking across the Andes into Chile, we've been hearing from the media that the health authorities in that country are now planning to start lifting restrictions on international arrivals by the end of the month. Santiago Airport would be the sole international port of arrival, with visitors needing to provide a negative PCR test. This is very important news, considering that Chile was one of the few countries in the region that fully never closed its domestic or international borders, however, had a very strict restriction on only permitting Chilean citizens or residents to enter the country. And with the eliminations of the restrictions for non-Chilean citizens or residents, this would certainly help the Chilean economy, as well as help the restart of more flights into the country. Heading north to Peru, the airlines are continuing to face some operational restrictions, both at Lima Airport and other airports in the country. We're hoping and we ask that all stakeholders work together to ensure that sufficient capacity is available both on the ground and in the air in order to satisfy the current demand. In Peru, like in other countries that have slowly or have begun to restart air travel, as more passengers begin to travel, as more passengers gain more confidence, there is going to be a demand and a need for more flights. And this is why it's so important that in an airport like Lima, which is a hub, it must be allowed to function as such, facilitating for timely transfer connections between flights, both domestic and international. And while everyone is aware of the limitations of the existing facilities, these must be used as best as possible following the guidelines published by ICAO. And our call out to the government of Peru, as others that have imposed extreme restrictions on safe distancing amongst terminals, we ask that our government utilize and apply what ICAO has recommended. And while the full recovery is still some time away, as I mentioned, the industry cannot afford to accept any more delays in the planned airport expansion. So we need to make sure that the current plans to build a new runway and a new terminal continue in its right due course, as we once again try to obtain the 2019 traffic levels as quickly as possible. Heading further north to Colombia, here we're also facing capacity restrictions at Bogotá's El Dorado International Airport, very similar to what's happening in other airports. The number of hourly operations needs to be increased, and going forward, the world slot guidelines needs to be adhered to so airlines can properly plan their schedules. We are making good headways with the Colombian government. We've had extensive discussions with the Minister of Transport and is fully on board and working to implement the WSG guidelines as quickly as possible. When we look at the Caribbean region, which was one of the fastest or the parts of our region that opened the fastest early on in June and July, we're also seeing, unfortunately, an increasing trend of airport taxes and fees, along with the inclusion of insurance costs into travel authorizations and visas. And this is quite worrisome for IATA and the industry. And while we fully understand the need that governments need to recover from the financial losses because of COVID, the demand needs to be stimulated and not suppressed at this stage. And we certainly encourage the Caribbean government to focus more on ensuring that we have the right protocols, that we have the highest levels, standards of biosafety procedures throughout their islands, instead of implementing these taxations, which will deter passengers from coming to our Caribbean nations that are so highly dependent on air travel. In Central America, we would like to highlight Nicaragua, which urgently needs to implement ICAO's protocols, as the current rules and regulations are placing a heavy operational burden on those airlines wanting to offer scheduled service to that country. So we need the government to please take into consideration the protocols that are already available to them. Last but not least, we're seeing strong recovery in the Mexico market, both domestic and international. Therefore, finalizing the redesign of the Mexico City airspace is key for the continuous development of the industry. We've been cooperating very extensively with CENEAM and AFAC, the Civil Aviation Authority, and we've urged them that the relevant authorities move this progress forward in line with the industry requirement, which is needed to conduct safe operations while transitioning to the new airspace. And we hope that the new airspace will be able to be implemented in a timely fashion. The industry is ready to continue on its collaborative plan. As I mentioned, we've been working extensively with CENEAM and AFAC, but we need to ensure that the redesigned airspace for Mexico City allows, above all, safe operations while beginning to manage the necessary capacity of the future three airport systems. As you can see, countries across the region are reopening step by step, which is very good news. We are in a very different place than we were back in July, where the majority of our countries in the regions was still closed off. But at the same time, this places a heavy burden on the airlines and does not help stimulate demand or provide the right level of service to passengers. So we need to make sure that governments continue to cooperate in a better way than they have been doing amongst themselves in the recent months. COVID-19 is a global pandemic, and country-specific protocols will not help aviation play its part in the economic recovery. It's no time now to invent the wheel. The wheel has already been invented. The International Civil Aviation Organization this week approved the updated takeoff guidance, which provides government with all the biosafety protocols needed to allow aviation to operate safely during this ongoing pandemic. And we're looking forward to more detailed guidance on testing and travel bubbles which are due to come out in the next few weeks. This should allow us to move forward with systematic pre-departure COVID testing for international travelers. This way, more borders can safely open and travel restrictions lifted. And even if there are indications that the vaccine could be available in early 2021, we need to continue to follow the agreed multi-layered biosafety approach in order to safeguard this industry, as the industry will play a crucial role in distributing the vaccine once it's made available. With that, I thank you, and I am open to take questions if you may have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Gracias. So we will start going through the questions. As just a reminder, if possible, please put them into the chat. That makes managing the questions easier for us. And so we'll start. We have one in Spanish related to testing, and I think also, Alejandro, I think you're on the line from our end, just in case it goes into very detailed. So this comes from Panama, and it's, para garantizar la seguridad en el sector aéreo, es recomendable exigir pruebas de PCR a los viajeros de salida y entrada o solo de entrada. So this is like, should passengers be tested at both ends or only at one end? Hoy se anunció en Panamá que desde el 12 de octubre a la fecha se han destacado 173 pasajeros positivos que intentaron ingresar al país por el aeropuerto de Tocumen. Esto significa que salieron de su país sin resultado de una prueba. So apparently 173 people have tried to enter Panama since the 12th of October. And have been found with a positive test on arrival. So I don't know if we can make some comments on the procedure into Panama and what our take is on testing prior to departure or on arrival. I don't know, Peter, if you want to start, and maybe Alejandro add.
Well, I'll let Alejandro just give what our position is. I think it's going to be very similar. So I'll let Alejandro just talk to the what the position of IATA is and make the comment with regards to Panama.
Ok, perfecto. Buenas tardes a todos. En el caso panameño, digamos la posición de IATA en cuanto al testing a nivel global es una posición única y es la aplicación de pruebas de COVID de manera sistemática en origen para todos los pasajeros. Y eso es lo que hemos venido trabajando con todos los gobiernos. En el caso panameño puntualmente, Panamá también hace pruebas a la llegada y en estos casos que estamos haciendo referencia en la pregunta, seguramente son casos de pasajeros que volaron sin la prueba y al momento de entrar a Panamá se les exige que se la realicen y salieron seguramente positivos. Pero en teoría, digamos en la práctica, el pasajero debe volar con su prueba previo al viaje.
Okay, maybe Alejandro,
Sure.
just for those who are only English speaking, can we just maybe clarify? So if I understood you correctly, those cases that Panama announced is basically related to passengers who didn't have the PCR test on or didn't take it before leaving their home country, arrived in Panama without a test and had to be retested on arrival in that case.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And our testing position worldwide is the systematic testing on origin for all passengers before departing their countries.
Okay. Peter, you want to comment on that before we move to the next question, or?
No, I think Alejandro covered it well.
Yeah. Okay. Then next one is from Chile. Buenas tardes. Ayer el Parlamento de Chile avanza en un proyecto de ley que permite el endeso de pasajes aéreos a terceros. Si bien el endeso es limitado, ¿qué opina tiene IATA respecto a esta propuesta legislativa? So this has to do with endorsing tickets to other people shortly before departure, something that the Chilean Parliament is looking at, and so I don't know if Peter, if you want to make some comments on that, yeah.
I can't go too much into it because we're still reviewing the proposed rulemaking change. We are since it just came out yesterday. IATA's position is that this is not common practice around the world in terms of being able to endorse tickets that are in the name of one passenger to another. So this is not a common practice that is used all around the world, and it does bring up issues for the airlines, bookkeeping, reservations, etc. So it is an operational burden on the airline, on the industry. We hope to have more information within the next couple of days as our team reviews the proposed rulemaking change. But that's as much information as I could provide at this time.
Okay, do you want to say a few words for this in Spanish?
Bueno, es todavía un poco pronto para comentar en detalle sobre la nueva propuesta en el gobierno chileno para el endoso de los billetes de un pasajero a otro. No es una práctica común que se realiza a nivel mundial. Obviamente es un impacto importante para las líneas aéreas si se lleva a implementar por los temas de logística interna, operacional, pero por el momento estamos revisando la documentación, la propuesta, y en los próximos días IATA tendrá una posición formal sobre ello.
Ok, gracias. Bueno, ya tengo dos de Argentina en inglés y en español, más o menos preguntando la balance de las operaciones de las últimas 2 semanas en Argentina, cómo se reiniciaron algunos de los vuelos internacionales y cabotaje. I don't know, Peter, you have a general update on Argentina. I think MJ is also on the line.
Bueno, la buena noticia es que, bueno, aunque no se han abierto las fronteras 100%, sí se han abierto las fronteras para los países vecinos, de los ciudadanos de esos países, Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, Brasil, para poder entrar al país. También ya no se tendrá que operar de una manera de repatriación o vuelos especiales. Ya las líneas aéreas pueden solicitar sus programaciones regulares como se hacía anterior a la pandemia. Lo que sí se sigue en vigor es la restricción que está en vigor sobre la entrada de ciudadanos de esos países que no son de los países vecinos, que es una de las prioridades que tenemos nosotros como industria para poder convencer al gobierno o trabajar con el gobierno para eliminar esa restricción que existe en estos momentos. You want me to say, I'll say quickly in English?
A few words in English, yes.
Yeah, so we have seen some good movement in Argentina over the last month. One is airlines being able to now plan their flights on a scheduled basis like they have done pre-COVID times. Flights will no longer be labeled as special flights, so airlines can now go back to somewhat of a normal business, although there are still restrictions in place for countries that are not neighboring Argentina. That is one of the areas that we continue to work with the authorities to find a way that we can eliminate restrictions for non-citizens or neighboring country citizens. The second one, obviously, is Argentina permitting neighboring countries, their citizens, to enter Argentina freely without restrictions as they posed in the past. So we are seeing good progress in Argentina. It hasn't been as quickly as one had hoped in the past, but being able to now have scheduled service where airlines can plan with a longer time frame than month by month, and the opening of the country to certain citizens of other countries is good news for the industry. But I will say one thing, as I mentioned in my comments, the 30% taxation, which is quite high, probably one of the highest around the world, it is certainly an obstacle for the industry recovery and the economic recovery of the country. One area that we would certainly hope that the government reconsiders to remove or eliminate.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think it's actually 35%, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and before we move on from Argentina, there's a specific question on there's been quite a few complaints with regard to getting authorizations for flights, a formal complaint letter to ANAC. I don't know if we want to comment on that before we move on. That's one of the questions in the chat.
I'll start and then pass it on to Maria Jose, our country manager in Argentina. I can't speak formally to the complaint, but I know there's been challenges in terms right now, Ezeiza is the only airport that's being operated at the time. Aeroparque and Palomar are still closed, so airlines that would operate into those two facilities have had to push their operations into Ezeiza. And in addition, as I mentioned in our comments, my initial comments, having 45 minutes of buffer between airplanes or flights, particularly in the early morning arrivals or evening banks, has an impact in the industry. The airlines cannot maximize their operations, cannot maximize their hub operations at the origin. So this is, again, is one of the industry concerns that we have, and we hope that the government will reduce the buffer time between arrival aircraft, particularly in the early morning when the international flights come in. María José, I don't know si tienes tú más comentarios sobre ello.
Sí, gracias, Peter. Solo para agregar lo que estás diciendo. La resolución autorizando el retorno de los vuelos de tipo regular se dio bien a fin de octubre, cuando las líneas aéreas para noviembre ya habían pedido vuelos con carácter especial, con lo cual noviembre todavía no sabemos muy bien cómo está funcionando esta dinámica del pedido de los vuelos regulares, de las aprobaciones y demás. Pienso que diciembre va a ser el mes que hay que mirar con mucha atención, que es lo que estamos haciendo. Las líneas aéreas ya han mandado sus pedidos de vuelos regulares para diciembre y estamos esperando a ver cómo va a ser esta mecánica de aprobación de las factibilidades horarias, teniendo en cuenta esta restricción de de un vuelo cada 45 minutos que mencionó Peter, que fuertemente afecta la capacidad del aeropuerto. Así que lo estamos viendo muy de cerca. Gracias.
Gracias, María José. Ok, con esto pasamos a otra pregunta más general. En América Latina recién inició la recuperación de la industria aérea. En este sentido, ¿ve IATA que pueda haber próximamente un estanciamiento de la recuperación, dado que otras regiones del mundo, por ejemplo Europa, han retrocedido debido a las segundas oleadas de infección? So this is yes, we're seeing a slight positive movement in Latin America, but how could the second wave hitting other parts of the world, especially Europe, sort of affect the outlook going forward? Peter,
bueno, obviamente va a haber un impacto, como menciona en la pregunta, en América Latina nos estamos preparando para la temporada de verano. El confinamiento en nuestros países de América Latina ha sido muy larga para muchos de nuestros ciudadanos en varios países, pero donde vemos una recuperación rápida, estamos viendo en México, ya lo habíamos mencionado, en los vuelos domésticos o la capacidad está volviendo entre un 85, 90 y tantos % de recuperación. Brasil está también incrementando. Líneas aéreas como LATAM ya han anunciado que están incrementando al 26% de sus operaciones. Así que estamos viendo un incremento gradual de las compañías latinoamericanas para empezar a crecer. El impedimento que tenemos en estos momentos, debido a la importancia de Europa y Norteamérica con el movimiento de pasajeros entre estas regiones, estamos viendo que Norteamérica y en Europa hay un segundo rebrote del COVID, y esto va a seguramente empeorar la situación y empeorar o demorar la recuperación que veamos de movimiento de pasajeros entre esas regiones y América Latina y el Caribe. Seguramente lo que veremos es más movimiento interregional o interpaís y menos entre los continentes de Europa y Norteamérica. I'll say that quickly in English, Marcus.
Yes, please.
So, in the case, we all know that in Latin America, the closure of borders, restrictions of travel were one of the longest throughout the entire world, in excess of 7-8 months. Now, as we approach the summer season, we're seeing a very strong recovery in the markets, a very aggressive recovery. I mentioned Mexico. Many of the Mexican carriers are between 80 and 100% of their capacity compared to 2019. We've seen good growth in Brazil. We're seeing with the restart in Peru and in Colombia that traffic is very quickly growing. Airlines such as LATAM have already announced they're already increasing their capacity to 26%. So we're seeing good, with the reopening of borders, both domestic and international, airlines are beginning to add more capacities to the system. People want to travel. However, because of what is happening in Europe and in North America, with a second wave of COVID cases, we do sense and we do feel that there could be airlines from those continents reducing capacity and seeing less people traveling. So quite possibly for the Latin American summer season, which is a winter season in the Northern Hemisphere, we do foresee for the next couple of months a significant downslide in terms of passenger traffic in that. And obviously that would have an impact on the recovery for the region.
Okay, thank you. With that, pasamos a Colombia. La periodista está pidiendo una actualización sobre cómo ven la cooperación del gobierno de Colombia con la industria y si se han visto beneficios que ya no exigen pruebas PCR para ingresar al país. So this is just general update on Colombia, how the industry and government are working together, and if we've seen any sort of immediate effects of the country no longer requiring a negative PCR test to enter the country, if that's had any upturn on traffic.
Okay. La relación con el gobierno ha sido muy buena, tanto con Aerocivil como con la ministra de Transporte, Turismo, de Salud. Ha habido una cooperación muy buena, una transparencia en el trabajo, en la implementación de las regulaciones que han sido muy beneficiosos. Obviamente hemos encontrado algunos retos, unos obstáculos que nos perjudicaban un poquito con el tema de los slots en El Dorado, pero bueno, estamos trabajando con ello. Esperamos que ya para el mes de diciembre, enero vayamos viendo un mejoramiento de los sistemas y que se empiece a aplicar nuevamente las guías de slots mundiales. Con la eliminación del testing, no tengo información si ha sido una causa o no. Lo que sí hemos visto desde que se reactivó los vuelos domésticos y los vuelos internacionales, ha habido una demanda muy sana, muy buena, que ha ido incrementando semana tras semana por la necesidad de viajar. Y vemos que eso va a seguir mejorándose con el tiempo. No sé si Andrés o Alejandro tengan más información que no tenga yo sobre si la eliminación del testing ha sido una razón por un mayor número de vuelos o demanda.
No veo a Andrés, pero
que Andrés no está, creo.
Ok, pero sí puedo decir que también ha significado una mejoría en la experiencia del pasajero, lo cual también es positivo, y ha disminuido, digamos, los tiempos de espera a la llegada al país, lo cual también es positivo. Entonces, por ese lado, es bienvenido.
Sí, adicionalmente, Peter, ha generado una mayor agilidad, como lo dice Alejandro, en facilitación aeroportuaria. Ha permitido que congestiones en el área de migración se incrementen, inclusive mayor número de personas al arribo al país, lo cual ha sido positivo para la facilitación aeroportuaria y para el desarrollo de operaciones aéreas.
Gracias, Edgar. Y yo creo que ese es el reto más grande que tenemos a nivel de la recuperación del mercado en nuestra región, es las limitaciones que tenemos a nivel infraestructura y de procesos en el sistema aeroportuario. No es tanto la culpa de los operadores del aeropuerto como que las normativas que están imponiendo muchos gobiernos a nivel regional. Este es un ejemplo, eliminando lo que es el test, la prueba, reduce la cantidad de tiempo que se obliga al pasajero a estar en las zonas de llegadas, inmigraciones, y el personal puede procesar más rápido al pasajero y no hay esas colas largas para ser verificados.
Sí, Peter, ya llegué, no me escuchaban antes. Traté de hablar, pero no me escuchaban. No, respecto a la pregunta de si hemos visto un incremento en el tráfico, lo que pasa es que ha sido muy pronto, estamos a una semana de haber levantado la restricción, así que todavía no tenemos esos resultados. Y es muy pronto para ver un impacto en la demanda de esa medida. De resto, creo que pues lo que dijiste cubre todos los temas.
Gracias, Andrés. Y bueno, disculpe, ¿no? Que no te hemos visto antes en la lista. Peter, do you maybe just want to do the infrastructure part in English, because we have some on the line that don't speak Spanish. I think that's an important message that we were trying to get out, that the infrastructure is becoming an issue at some airports.
Yes, I will. So this is something that we're working with. We've been working with ACI, many airports. We've been with the opening of borders, the removal of restrictions, airlines week over week have been able to increase their capacity. They're offering more flights to more destinations, but we're being hampered in the number of flights that we can add to the system because of the restrictions that have been imposed on social distancing, the types of PCR testing, etc. And this is why the example that took place in Colombia, in which the government decided to remove PCR testing, is so important, because that is one step further to eliminating an added barrier or added burden that needs to be verified by the authorities to make sure that the passenger is in compliance. So when we do have the restrictions in place, that type of restriction is slowing our recovery in the markets, because airlines cannot put more planes into the systems because of these procedures that need to be abided. So we certainly commend Colombia in removing this procedure or the testing, and they're more focused on the contact tracing at this point. And we hope other governments around the region will do that, particularly as we need to maintain social distancing and maintain compliance of certain procedures.
Okay, thank you. Gracias, Peter. And with that, go to Mexico. We have a few questions from Mexico. So the first one has to do with the recovery of the market, and I think Quit is also on the line, Quit Lahuac, who is our country manager in Mexico. So here's the first question. ¿Cuál es la proyección que tienen para el cierre del año considerando una mejora del mercado doméstico? I'm not sure if we're ready to give any sort of outlook for the end of the year, other than what we've already done, but maybe Peter and Quit, maybe you just want to make a quick comment on the domestic recovery.
Okay, I'll start and pass it on to Quit. Very quickly, Mexico has played with a certain level of advantage. They never fully closed their borders. They never imposed restrictions, nor have they imposed quarantine nor testing. So their market has basically remained open, even during the most challenging times early on in the crisis. This has obviously permitted them to maintain throughout the entire pandemic crisis up to now a certain number or certain level of service, and they were able to adapt to the needs of the customers. So that puts them in advantage over other countries. And we now clearly see the focus of many of the airlines is to recover the capacity as close to 2019 as possible. Do we have a forecast? No. But in terms of what the airlines are trying to do to meet the consumer needs, they're certainly putting the capacity into the system. No sé si quieres tú añadir algo o poner algo más tú.
No, Peter, creo que está bien con lo que has mencionado y lo que mencionaste al inicio, ¿no?
Ok. Y con eso pasamos a otra pregunta que se refiere a la situación de Interjet. No sé si queremos hacer algún comentario sobre lo que está pasando con Interjet por el momento. Peter, Quit.
Perdón, ¿puedes repetir la pregunta?
Interjet.
Ok. Bueno, rápidamente la posición. Mire, la situación de la línea aérea obviamente se puede leer por la prensa. Ha habido cambios en la jefatura de la empresa. Desde el punto de vista de IATA, puedo confirmar que en estos momentos estamos coordinando muy extensamente con la línea aérea. Tienen una responsabilidad hacia la gobernanza de IATA que tienen que cumplir, y hasta el momento han cumplido con esos requerimientos, y la gobernanza está allí no solo para proteger a los consumidores de la misma línea aérea, pero a las otras líneas aéreas que participan en el BCP de IATA en el país. Pero hasta el momento la importancia es que cumplan con la gobernanza de IATA. No sé si tienes tú algo más.
Gracias, Peter. No, y solo añadiría que, bueno, estamos aquí en constante comunicación con ellos, en el día a día, con el equipo Interjet, atendiendo los temas que tenemos ahí en proceso, ¿no? Básicamente es eso.
Gracias. Nos quedamos en México y pasamos al tema del espacio aéreo. El sindicato de los controladores aéreos han denunciado que CNEAM y AFAC están llevando a cabo la capacitación para la reconfiguración del espacio aéreo del Valle de México de una manera desordenada y sin que sea oficial. Bueno, tenemos un comentario de IATA sobre este tema. Creo que Cuito Peter.
Sí, bueno, ya lo mencioné yo en la presentación. Estamos coordinando, trabajando muy estrechamente con las autoridades mexicanas, tanto CNEAM como ATAC, en el rediseño del espacio aéreo. Es un rediseño muy complicado, pero muy importante para la eficiencia y la seguridad de los vuelos, sobre todo con el plan del gobierno de implementar el sistema aeroportuario de los 3 aeropuertos. Lo que tenemos que garantizar es cuando los procedimientos estén listos, sean lo más eficiente y lo más seguro posible. Y ya te ha dado su punto de vista, hemos dado nuestros puntos técnicos que se tienen que resolver en el corto plazo para poder implementar, pero estamos siguiendo adelante con ello.
Okay.
You want to say in English?
Yeah, maybe just do that in English quickly.
Okay, very quickly in English.
Point.
One of the most important airspace projects that we have in Latin America is actually in Mexico City with the Mexico City airspace redesign. It is something that the industry has been working with government over the last year. We are close to implementation, hopefully sometime towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. The industry has provided some technical comments to the air navigation service provider and to the government that needs to be considered and put into the final equation to ensure that the airspace will be safe and efficient. But the collaboration has been good with the government, and we expect that these procedures will be implemented within the next few months. We may see a slight delay because of ICAO scheduling timelines, but we do expect implementation in the near future. But we want to make sure that the industry's technical suggestions that we have provided are taken into the final implementation of the airspace redesign.
Okay, and before we move to questions coming from Panama, still getting a lot of questions in the chat on what a possible sort of closure of operations by Interjet would mean to the Mexican market. And I don't think we never comment specifically, but maybe we can just give a general example that, usually if an airline goes out of business, the market does recover and others pick up the business from elsewhere. And I think we've seen that in past cases across the globe, but maybe you just want to make a general comment to satisfy all the questions.
I think you've articulated correctly. There's always been a way, all around the world in different regions, developing regions where we've had crises and airlines go under. The market has always recovered. Where there is demand, there will be airlift. Either new airlines entering the market or those airlines that are in the market will take over for that void. In the case of Mexico, where Mexico is accustomed to this, we had this issue with Mexicana, IATA, many airlines that have folded over the years, and the local market, the local airlines have been able to absorb that void and vacancy. And not only that, since the closure of Mexicana many, many years ago, the industry not only was able to recuperate, but was able to increase the level of service and availability of capacity. So like in any other market, we adapt, we adjust, and we acclimate to customer needs.
Okay, maybe you can just sum that up quickly for the Spanish-speaking media.
Yeah. Bueno, esto no ha sido nuevo en México, como en muchos países a nivel del mundo. Cuando hay una línea aérea que sale del mercado, si hay demanda, si hay necesidad, los otros actores del mercado asumen ese void, how would we say void?
¿Escasez? I don't know.
Sí, bueno, escasez de capacidad, exacto. Así que hemos tenido muchos ejemplos y en el caso de México, cuando Mexicana paró de operar, las otras compañías absorbieron esa escasez de operaciones y hoy nos encontramos que hay más conectividad que en ese momento que hace 10, 15 años. Así que en el caso de México, como en otros mercados, siempre habrá otra línea aérea que entre al mercado o se absorbe esa escasez o la oportunidad que deja otra línea aérea en el mercado.
Gracias.
Pero yo diría, hasta el momento, la línea aérea sigue existiendo, sigue operando y tenemos que dejar que, bueno, esa compañía, como en otros mercados, tenga que seguir el proceso y vemos si seguirán existiendo, operando o dejará del mercado.
Sí, gracias por la clarificación. Vamos en este caso de verdad a Venezuela, porque parece que van a abrir vuelos a 5 países, entre ellos la República Dominicana, México y Panamá, y tenemos ya una opinión sobre la reapertura de este mercado.
Bueno, es muy escasez, ya era escasez anterior a la pandemia, y si miramos pre-COVID a lo que era la actualidad, no hay mucha diferencia. Anterior a COVID había los vuelos con Europa, que eran España y Portugal y Francia. También había un vuelo con Turquía y después dentro de la región era la conectividad con Panamá. En el caso panameño entendemos que van a autorizar los vuelos de Panamá, que es buenas noticias para Copa, para poder reactivar el mercado y establecer un poco más de conectividad. Turkish Airways está operando vuelos especiales y lo que necesitaríamos es la aprobación del gobierno venezolano para la conectividad con Europa. Pero bueno, no esperemos que vamos a tener más entrantes al mercado como lo que teníamos hace 5 o 6 años, porque no va a ser el caso.
Okay, say very quickly in English. Very quickly English, yes. So the reopening of Venezuela.
So it's good news to see that Panama will be added to the list of those countries are approved. But we need to recall that pre-COVID pandemic times, the connectivity with the country was already very limited, primarily with Panama, primarily with France, Spain, and Turkey. We hope that the government will open with or approve flights from Europe in the near future, but the expectation should not be that we're going to see more flights from other regions begin to start anytime soon. We just don't see that right now in terms of the current restrictions that are in play, but it is good news to see that they will approve flights to Panama.
Okay, and with that, since we only have a few minutes left, the last and final question relates actually to the good news of the week, that there seems to be a vaccine possibly on its way in some months. And the question relates to how, is the aviation industry, specifically cargo, ready to actually transport this vaccine, which apparently seems to be, needs to be stored at minus 80 degrees centigrade. So maybe you can just use that sort of for your closing remarks in English and Spanish.
So you've heard our Director General and CEO Alexander Juniak said, the transportation of vaccines may be one of the most important missions that air transport has ever done in its history. The magnitude of the vaccines that will have to be transferred all around the world. What is important for our region, like it is in many others, we need to work closer than ever with government, with health officials, with airports, to make sure that the logistics, the infrastructure, the regulations are in place by the time the vaccine is made available. These time-critical transportation will be of the essence, and we need to make sure that governments have the right standards, the right policies, the right procedures in place to make sure that these vaccines can be moved quickly, safely, and swiftly. And for that, we also need our airport partners to make sure that we have the right infrastructure at our airports, our facilities, to be able to either store the vaccines for a temporary period of time or to help facilitate the movement. So this is the time to plan. This is the time to coordinate. This is the time to implement the right policies that will be needed to transfer these important medications to our region. Saying that, we cannot be short-sighted. It will take time. While the vaccine may be made available, we will not get the dosages all at the same time. This is why it is so important that government and industry continue to work on reopening markets, on bringing public confidence back to the sector, and that quarantine restrictions be eliminated. And when governments need to, use testing and contact tracing as a way to ensure that aviation is not a vector of air travel. So we have to work very much in parallel, continue to restart, remove restrictions, remove quarantine, and at the same time prepare the logistics, the infrastructure, the policies that will help us move the vaccines as quickly as possible around our regions to help the citizens in our countries.
¿Y lo puedes repetir?
En español.
En español un poquito más corto, sí, pero en español para acabar con
nuestro director general y CEO, Alexander Joniak, lo dijo hace unas semanas, cuando la vacuna esté disponible, seguramente será la misión más importante que el transporte ha tenido en su historia, por la importancia, la urgencia, la manera en que se tiene que manejar estas mercancías, estas medicinas en el movimiento, cómo se tienen que almacenar, va a requerir una coordinación como nunca visto entre gobiernos, aeropuertos y líneas aéreas. Lo que sí tenemos que hacer en estos momentos es empezar la planificación para asegurar que los gobiernos implementen las políticas, los procedimientos que se tendrán que seguir, que no haya burocracias de aduana para el transporte de estas medicinas entre un país y el otro, trabajando con nuestros aeropuertos, asegurar que tengamos la infraestructura adecuada para poder mantener estas medicinas en un sitio contenido que cumpla con los requisitos de la medicación, y desde el punto de las líneas aéreas que podamos proceder a poder transportar cuanto más vacunas en la mayor cantidad de vuelos posibles una vez que ya estén disponibles las vacunas. Lo que sí tenemos es que trabajar en paralelo. No tenemos que olvidar que las vacunas no estarán disponibles en todos los sitios a la misma vez, será poco a poco, y no podemos levantar el pie del acelerador con la reactivación del mercado, trabajando con los gobiernos en levantar las restricciones, eliminar las cuarentenas para poder ayudar que la industria se recupere cuanto antes posible. Así que en los próximos meses es trabajar en paralelo, preparar para cuando la vacuna esté disponible para transportarla de una manera eficiente, segura y cumpliendo con las normativas, pero a la misma vez enfocando en esa reactivación y eliminando cuanto antes las restricciones y las cuarentenas que tenemos en nuestra región.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Gracias. Gracias a todos. Before we leave, I know there's a few of you asking for further financial outlooks for this year. That should be available by the end of November. We will pass that to you as a press release in the usual form, but for the call today, the figures we gave at the beginning, our September traffic figures are the sort of most up-to-date, but further financial outlooks to follow. And with that, thank you again for joining.
Marcus, do you want to share with them, with the media, our next media during the AGM?
Yeah, we can do that. So from the 23rd to the 25th of November, we will have our virtual global media day and annual general meeting. Invite should have gone out. If you haven't received invites, please email me and I can add you to the list, and that will be virtual events for 3 days of that week.